Good evening, my ghouls, and welcome to the Phantasmagorium. I am your host, the Creeper of Channel X. Tonight we bring you a story from a farmer's nightmare, a tale of rebellion, compromise, and a hard lesson of respect. We now present to you, Clack Moo. As I laid in bed counting sheep that night, I heard a curious sound out of the cool midnight air. Click, clack. I tried to ignore the sound, but it grew louder with each passing minute. Click, clack, click, clack. What is this specter? I whispered aloud to myself. I rose from my bed to the cold night floor of my old farmhouse and stepped slowly toward the window. The brightness of the full moon shone upon the meadow, and in the barn, I saw a candlelight flickering through the rickety doors. Who's tinkering in my barn? I thought to myself. I gathered my shotgun and a lantern to investigate. As I walked across the dewy night grass toward the old barn, the commotion grew louder. Click, clack, click, clack. When I reached the doors, I was struck by a peculiarity. There was a note nailed to one of the doors. It read, "Dear Farmer Brown, the barn is very cold at night. We'd like you to bring us some electric blankets. Sincerely, the cows." What madness is this? I thought. I pulled one of the doors slightly ajar to peer inside. The cows appeared to be sleeping, and the noise had ceased. But I spotted an old typewriter in between two of them, kept secure from anyone who would think to abscond with their treasure. Surely this must be some joke, or a silly dream brought about by a bad piece of meat. Cows can't type, and they certainly don't need electric blankets, I said. I tore down the note, crumpled it up, and threw it into the barn before closing the door. As I walked back to the house, I heard an angry-sounding moo from the barn. The next morning, I awoke thinking, what a terrible dream that was. Imagine, cows typing. I laughed a bit at myself for even having the thought. After finishing my breakfast, I walked out to the barn to get milk. When I reached the barn doors, I gasped, stopping dead in my tracks at the sight of a brand new note on the door. I approached, grabbed the note with one hand, and read, "Sorry, we're on strike. The barn is closed. No milk today." "No milk?" I cried out. In the background, I heard that the machine had started up again. Click, clack, click, clack, clickety, clack, moo. I then retired for the day, wondering what to do. How is it that cows have learned to type? I asked myself. Was it some bad joke being pulled on me by one of the farmers down the road? The next morning, there was another note nailed to the barn door. It read, "Dear Farmer Brown, the hens are cold too. They would also like electric blankets. Sincerely, the cows." I yanked the note from the door, tore it in half, and threw it inside the barn in a crumpled mess. I looked around at the cows who were all staring back at me and said, "No blankets. Now it is I who am on strike," and I returned to the farmhouse. The next day, I found yet another note on the barn door. This note read, "Closed. No milk. No eggs." "No eggs?" I cried. In the background, I heard them making that same terrible noise. Click, clack. Cows that type? Hens on strike? Whoever heard of such a thing? How can I run a farm with no milk and no eggs? I was furious. I then pulled out my own old typewriter from below my bed. Dear cows and hens, there will be no electric blankets. You are cows and hens. I demand milk and eggs. Sincerely, Farmer Brown. Duck, assuring me that he was a neutral party, volunteered to deliver my note to the cows. All night long I waited for an answer. Early the next morning, Duck knocked on the front door and handed me a note. Dear Farmer Brown, we are willing to exchange our typewriter for electric blankets. Leave the blankets outside the barn door, and we will send Duck over with the typewriter. Sincerely, the cows. I initially screamed about how I don't deal with terrorists. But after some mulling, I decided this would be a good deal if it would get production moving again. I left a pile of electric blankets next to the barn door and waited for Duck to come back to me with the typewriter. The next morning, I found a note stuck to my front door. Dear Farmer Brown, the pond is quite boring. We'd like a diving board. Sincerely, the ducks. Click, clack, quack. This left me furious. I made a deal with the cows and lived up to my end of the deal. But now, Duck, instead of delivering the typewriter as promised, has stolen the typewriter and decided to take a chance at making his own power play. That was the final straw. I invited Duck to a private meeting by the pond that evening. Come alone, I wrote. When Duck showed up to the meeting, I was waiting in the shadows by a tree stump with one chair on each side. I sat in one, and with a wave of my hand, I invited him to sit in the other. As Duck sat in anticipation, I sat across from him in silence for what seemed like several minutes, staring directly into his eyes. Finally, I leaned forward just over the tree stump table, which prompted Duck to do the same, as he assumed I was about to whisper something to him. As Duck leaned in, I snatched him by the back of the neck with one hand, pulling with my other hand a mighty axe into the air, coming down upon Duck's neck with fury, as I was paying back Duck not only for his disrespect and thievery, but also for all we had gone through with the cows, having trusted Duck only to taste his betrayal. As Duck's body lay limp upon the tree stump table, I pulled out a freshly typed note, fastening it to the side of the body by shoving a nail through the center with my hand. The blood was already seeping through the paper. It read, click, clack, whack. Well, I think you'd agree that story certainly was whack. It seems to have changed a bit since I first read it in my childhood. Tonight's lesson? Never leave a typewriter in the barn. Until next time,